really drawing me to this style of gardening was when I first got into gardening. You know, you'd go to the plant center and you'd see all these beautiful plants, and maybe you buy one or two, you bring them home, they look great for about 2 weeks, and then they do nothing the rest of the season. Has anyone had experience with plants like that? What kind of plant?
I guess I can't think of
Put you on the spot a little bit. So one for me is peonies, and I know that those are a really popular plant. They're great in a lot of ways. They have beautiful blooms, they smell great, but they don't bloom for very long, and then they just kind of have green foliage the rest of the year. So for me, that's a little underwhelming. So we'll talk about things that we can use instead that will really pull their weight in the garden. And we'll look at some of the plants that we already have in the garden, like the peonies or daylilies, that we can use for other things beyond just their pretty flowers. So let's talk about what is a multi-purpose plant. So something that fills multiple garden roles, things that are for us as the gardener, ornamental and edible. For wildlife, we look at how are we helping the pollinators, the birds, because a lot of us like bird watching. And then we have lots of other auxiliary roles. And those are the things that are less common, things that we don't usually think about when we're selecting plants. We always want to look at plants that fill more than one role. So if they have pretty flowers, great. But if they have interesting foliage, if they are edible, we always want to look for those additional options so that we can get the most out of our plants. Possible uses, so ornamental is of course our most popular one, followed closely by anything that's edible. Sentimental is a really big one for me. A lot of us have been gardeners for a long time or have experience with somebody in our life who introduced us to gardening. And even if a plant fills no other role than that sentimental reminder of someone we love, this is the one that I'm willing to plant for no other reason than maybe it reminds me of my mom or someone else that I love. But we have medicinals, insectaries, so that's anything that's going to draw our pollinators or other beneficial insects, nitrogen fixers, and mulch makers. And the list continues. Dynamic accumulators, wildlife habitat, erosion control, windbreaks, and a few other things. Like, I know there's not a lot of people who are going to be choosing plants specifically for dyes or for livestock forage, but it's interesting to think about all the different things that a plant can do, especially if it's already in your yard. So we'll talk about ornamentals first. Obviously, this is the reason most of us are in gardening, but we look for things that have long blooming flowers. So sometimes plants naturally have a long bloom time. Sometimes they have a short one, but there's cultivars available that will bloom for longer. So here's a list of some that have a long bloom time. This one right here is my favorite, the fringed bleeding hearts. So our old-fashioned bleeding hearts are an ephemeral, which means that they die back after spring. But the fringed bleeding hearts, they're one of the first things to emerge in spring. They have this beautiful ferny, frilly foliage, and then they bloom from May to September. So this is actually my longest blooming plant in the garden. We look at rebloomers. There's some that are common, like lilacs and Dutch iris, where there are rebloomers available. Now, we have a shorter season for growing in North Dakota, so not everything that's labeled in a store that as a rebloomer is going to actually have enough time to rebloom, but I know for sure that the Dutch iris and lilac, some of those we do have enough time to get some extra blooms on those at the end of the season. And then things that rebloom after cutting them back. So they bloom fairly early on, spring through early summer, and then they start to turn brown, get a little bit ragged. We can just cut these back either halfway or to the ground. They'll get that fresh flush of green foliage and then send up new flower stalks, so we can get some more life from them that way. Something that not as many people are looking for, especially when they're new to gardening, is the foliage and what that can bring to the table. So once the flowers are gone, we want our plants to still be interesting. One of my favorites is heuchera, coral bells. These are just a few different colors, and these are honestly not even the most exciting colors. They come in pink and purple and silver, and they often have this beautiful marbling in the veins. So peppering those into your shade garden can be a really great way to bring pops of color that will last all season long. Hostas are another great one where we have more than just our standard green and white ones now. We have lots of blue ones, ones with frilly leaves. And so I know a lot of people with hostas, they don't even let them bloom because they're interested in the foliage because they're so neat now. Bugleweed is another one. We've got to be a little bit careful with this one just because it spreads by rhizomes. So if it is really happy, it might spread a little bit more in your garden than you want it to. But it's also nice to get that little carpet of color.
Which one spreads?
The bugleweed, the ajuga. We want to look at fall foliage. There's lots of things that we plant for other purposes that have really pretty foliage in fall. So chokeberry is one that a lot of us plant for the tart berries or for wildlife because the birds really like the berries too. But it has really beautiful red and orange leaves in the fall. Blueberry is one that unfortunately we can't grow here, but if you're really determined, you can put in the extra work, and those have really beautiful fall foliage as well. And of course, maples and lots of our perennial grasses will turn all sorts of reds and purples in the fall. Other things we can look at for our leaves is variegation. So this one right here is bug loss or brunnera, and you can see that we have this beautiful silver marbling on the leaves, and it stays like that all season long. This is another one that is for the shade garden, and so that silvery pop of color is really nice. In the shade, it's very visible and adds a nice element of interest.
What was that one that was in the shade?
That's the bug loss.
That spreads?
That one doesn't spread.
Oh.
But lungwort is another one that has similar foliage. It's more spotted instead of marbled like this, but again, it has that really pretty silvery spots on the foliage. Then we want to look at texture. So that picture of the bleeding heart I had before, that had that really beautiful, almost blue-green ferny foliage, which adds a lot of interesting texture. So if you think about some of your more common plants that have kind of boring leaves, you can plant things with that interesting like fern foliage or succulent foliage, things with like fuzzy textures that will bring a lot more interest to the garden. And then we want to think about how these individual plants work when we combine them in a garden setting, because we're usually not just planting one plant or one type of plant. So if we look at this picture, we've got hostas, we've got Macdenia, I think. A couple different things down here, including that heuchera. This one's a little bit purple. Some ferny foliage, some tree foliage, and you can see all the different textures that are in this picture, and there's really no flowers in here. There's a couple of little ones right here on this one, but that's not the draw. It's the interesting foliage and the way it contrasts with each other, both the different colors, and like this one is round, this one is spiky. So combining those elements, we can get some really interesting garden palettes. And then we can also incorporate our evergreens for that year-round interest. Incorporating annuals, I know a lot of us have been taught the traditional way of gardening where here's our perennial garden, here's our annual garden, and here's our vegetable garden, and we never cross them. But we can actually do a lot with combining those different elements, including incorporating annuals. So something that's really easy to do if you plant self-seeding annuals like snapdragons, alyssum, things that want to grow there and will just readily spread themselves around, but be polite about it. Those are really great plants. You plant them once and then they'll pop up throughout your garden without any extra work.
Bachelor buttons, do they do the same?
Bachelor buttons will spread as well. They're great for filling in temporary gaps. So again, things like alyssum and snapdragon, great for planting out in early spring because they can handle a little bit of frost. That way you have something pretty to look at while the rest of your plants are still getting established. And then by the time your perennials have leafed out and are starting to spread, it'll be warm. Those cool season annuals will start dying back, and then they'll come back in the fall once it cools off again. You can add design elements where long-term interest is needed. So if we have some of those plants where they're only interesting for 2 or 3 weeks of the year, but we want to keep them anyways, we can add those different design elements with annuals to accent that in the times when that plant isn't so interesting. Vines as a ground cover is another really neat one. A lot of times when we're looking at growing annual vines, we have an obelisk or a trellis or an arbor that we're growing them up. But a lot of them will actually spread really nice, either tumbling over a wall like this, or they'll actually spread across the ground if they have some open space to do so. And that can be a great way to both get some neat color and to do some weed suppression as well. Cut and dried flowers. Not everyone cuts flowers, but they're always really nice to look at and bring inside if you have the opportunity. So we want to look for things that have a longer vase life. So there are some things like cosmos that are absolutely beautiful in a vase, and then 2 days later, they're gone. So look for something with a longer vase life, rebloomers, so that you can harvest freely, because we want to leave some in the garden so that we can continue to look at them. And then we can plant densely so that when we do harvest those flowers for bringing inside, we still have plenty of space to work with, lots of stuff that's filled in, and we don't leave those big empty spaces. There's lots of flowers that are great for cutting and drying, like statice, annual asters, and globe amaranth. Those are things that look great in a fresh bouquet, and then you can just leave them sitting in the vase for a few weeks. They will dry themselves, and they'll continue to look nice for a year or two, even more if you take care of them. So, edible landscaping with annuals, there's a lot of things that we can do with the vegetable annuals. So you can see we have like a pepper in this bouquet, an artichoke, and then we have our more traditional flowers mixed in. But there's a lot of really neat elements. Like if we have some extra peppers, if you're one of those people who plants a single zucchini plant and you end up with 100 zucchini, you can think about ways to incorporate those in a decorative arrangement as well. Then we're looking for annuals with interesting foliage, like ornamental kale. There's a lot of Swiss chard that has either those bright red or orange stems. Those look really pretty intermixed within a perennial garden. And then you have your temporary fillers. So these are things that have a really short harvest window. So you plant a radish and then 25 days later it's ready to pull. These are great for just filling in that space until your perennials can take over. So looking at edible landscaping, there's lots of great trees. I think that the less work that you have to do in the garden, the better. And the best way to do that is to plant trees and shrubs and things with that longer lifespan. So here's some options that all have really pretty flowers. Or some like the buckeye, that they get those interesting nuts that add that visual element later in the season. But like this flowering plum here, very pretty, especially since a lot of them bloom earlier in the spring before a lot of our perennials have taken off. And then there's lots of cultivars as well that have been developed not only for quality fruit, but then for the beautiful elements as well. There's a European hazelnut called Red Dragon. It has contorted limbs, so they do the twisting as they grow. And it has edible hazelnuts on it, and then it has red foliage that turns even darker in the fall. So that's one that has full season interest, plus you get to eat it. So shrubs, again, another great option. Our June berries will start blooming shortly. I'm really excited about getting those for the first time this year. But they're also really pretty just as ornamentals. If you want the June berries specifically for fruit, the alnifolia is the one to go for. Those have the best tasting fruit, but the other ones are really pretty too and are edible. Looking through our list of other shrubs here, there's plenty of options. And then we get into perennials. There's lots of things that we can grow on the same layer as our annual vegetables that are actually perennials. So rhubarb, horseradish are two of the most common ones that we see available in nurseries. But then we have some really interesting things like Egyptian walking onions. So these they grow up like onions. They get these little bulbils on the top, and then when they get big enough, that weights the stem down, and then they root into wherever they fall. And you can harvest those and eat them, just like like with your chives. But those will slowly, over the years, walk around your garden, so that adds an interesting element as well. Sea kale is another really nice one. It has pretty blue-green foliage. It grows really well here. You don't have to do anything to take care of it. And then it gets really pretty white flowers in spring that smell great. So that's another edible multi-interest plant. Strawberries, lingonberries, and cranberries, all edible berries. They taste delicious. but they also make incredible ground covers. So if you have a big area that you need to fill or an area that you need weed suppression, especially strawberries will self-spread. So you buy 1 or 2 strawberry plants and just let them spread runners everywhere. Pretty soon you're going to have lots of delicious strawberries, but also some good weed suppression and ground cover. And then of course we have lots of perennial herbs that we can grow here. These are just a few. There's a really long list of things that we can grow, and a lot of them are ornamental as well, have very pretty flowers or smell very nice. So when we're growing for our wildlife, we want to look at what we're offering for food sources. We want to have like flowers with nectar, pollen throughout the season, as if we have lots in the summer but nothing in the spring, it's going to be harder for our wildlife to get established in our yard. We want to make sure we're planting enough to support everything. We got to keep in mind what we're going to be harvesting. So if we have something that wants to share that fruit with us, so like those June berries, birds really like June berries. So if we have the option, let's plant more than we need of those so that we do have a little bit to share, because they'll find a way to get them. And some nibbled leaves are a good thing. That means that your garden is part of the ecosystem. If we have a lot of damage on our plants, then we need to look at, is there something out of balance here? Do we have a pest problem of some sort? But if we just have a little bite taken out here and there, that's a sign of a healthy ecosystem. Shelter, so in addition to providing food, we also want to have a place for them to live. When you live in a neighborhood, it's really great to have a grocery store on the same street instead of having to drive 10 miles across town. So if we have a place for them to live in addition to eat on our property, we're going to have a lot more of that pollination, which is really important for getting things like our fruit. And then we want to plant in drifts of the same species. So it's really great to have one plant that pollinators like, but if there's only one, they go tell all their friends and then there's not enough food for everyone. So if we plant in like groups of 3, 5, or in drifts of a single plant type, that will be a better draw for those wildlife critters that need it. So pest control, there's a lot that we can do with integrated pest management, which is basically natural pest control where we don't need to use chemical interference. We don't need to go do a lot of manual manipulation to get rid of our pests. So pests are part of a healthy environment. They're going to be there. That's the ideal way to have our garden. But having a healthy habitat encourages natural management. So things that you can do to discourage wildlife would be smelly flowers or things with really textured foliage. So catmint is a really good one because the leaves are a little bit fuzzy, they smell minty, and they get a little bit shrubby if you get the bigger varieties, so that they can help discourage things from walking in there and eating the plants behind them that you actually want to keep. Trap crops, so nasturtium is a really great one that I like to use for flea beetles. It's a really pretty flower. It has edible leaves, so you can use it in a salad, you can use it to look at. They make a great ground cover if you get the vining varieties. And then in addition, when the flea beetles come to eat all of your radishes, they will eat your nasturtium for a little while, and then after a couple of weeks they'll go away. And that way you don't have to actually do any pest management. And we can also use distractions. Deer is a really big problem for a lot of people, especially when you live in town and there's regulations on how high you can build a fence, because deer can jump really high. Where I live, in my front yard, the fence height regulation is 3 feet. I mean, a deer can practically step over that. So that fence isn't going to do a lot on its own. But we can either put other plants on our side of the fence that they don't like, so they say, oh, there's only garbage in there, I don't want to go eat that, it's not worth going over that fence. We can put lots of ground covers in. If we have no bare ground, they won't have a clear space to land. So especially if they have to jump over a fence, but they don't see where they can put their feet on the other side, that's going to discourage them as well. We can also use things like hedges to redirect. So if they're coming in from over here, there's a nice field over here where they get food and they want to come into our garden over here. If we have a couple of plants over here that maybe they like, and then we continue that hedge back into the field where they came from, that way they'll go back that way, hopefully, without coming into our property. So we can use a combination of these different options to discourage the pests. So looking at medicinal things, it is really important that we are only using them medicinally if we are 100% sure of what they are, 100% sure of how to use them and what to treat them with. And then if we're taking any other medications, we definitely want to talk to a medical professional because there's lots of things that can interact with each other. Now, there are a lot of plants that we already have in the garden that can be used medicinally, like chamomile tea, which is wonderful, or even garlic. It has a lot of health benefits. So there's things like that where if it's just providing lots of extra nutrients, there's nothing wrong with using those like that. So there's a lot of plants that have some traditional medical use. So I talked about peonies a little bit at the beginning. Those are ones that actually had a lot of medicinal use, but not something that we traditionally think of peonies for. And then so yeah, we have a lot of medicinal plants that also are ornamental, draw in insects, and we can use them for culinary purposes as well. So this plant here is a marshmallow plant, which I absolutely love. They get really big and shrubby, but they're not shrubs, they're perennials. They can get like 5 to 6 feet tall. They have these really pretty little flowers on them. And they're not native, but if you're in an area with a lot of honeybees, the bees really like these. They have really fuzzy textured leaves, so it's nice to walk by and rub your fingers on those. And then they've got a lot of medicinal properties too. But they're really nice just as an ornamental. Talking about weed suppression, so we have a few options. We can either shade them out. A lot of our invasive noxious weeds like bindweed are sun lovers. We cultivate an area and then it doesn't get planted right away. We're almost definitely going to have bindweed or some of those other really problematic weeds. So if we can plant things that grow fast and provide a lot of shade, that's going to discourage those things from growing because they need that sunlight to get established. So rhubarb and hostas are really great for plants that stay in place but can grow up and provide some shade. We can look at ground covers like those strawberries that will spread themselves readily, because if all the ground is already planted up, there's not a way for those other weeds to get established. And this in the picture here is wild ginger. That's a really pretty one for shade. On chemical defense, so we're talking natural chemicals. There's a couple of plants that their roots release natural chemicals, which discourages other seeds from germinating. So black walnuts are a really big one, and sunflowers do that too. So 2 really good options. One is permanent, and one you can kind of move these plants around as needed. If you are starting a new area, you throw down a bunch of sunflower seeds, and then maybe over the next couple of years you get it planted up and take out those sunflowers. For erosion control, we look for plants that have deep roots. So here's a few good options. Native grasses are always going to be better than non-natives because they're adapted to grow in our dry climate, so they send roots really down deep. A lead plant and New Jersey tea plant are 2 really beautiful shrubs. This is New Jersey tea. They've got really pretty flowers, and they're great as ornamental shrubs, but also for that erosion control. And then we can look at those ground covers as well, things that are quick growers and thick spreaders. So basically anything with creeping in the name is probably going to fit the bill for erosion control. So this is a picture of that lead plant. So you can see it's different from that tea plant with its pretty white smoke blossoms, but this one is more like purple fireworks, and then it's got that mix of purple and orange in there, which is really unique. So nitrogen fixers. This lead plant is a nitrogen fixer. What that means is it's just a plant that has a beneficial relationship with bacteria in the soil that allows it to take nitrogen from the air instead of using up the nitrogen that's in the soil. So this allows the plants to thrive if you have nutrient deficient soil, and it also takes some of the pressure off of the soil to provide for other plants that are there. And over time, it can slowly replenish the nitrogen in the soil, so it's a great way to remediate your soil. So things like planting.
What is it called again?
This one is lead plant. And I believe that one is on the handout that I gave with the plant list. And you can see, it doesn't show it very well, but it's got interesting foliage too, almost like a sensitive plant. So anytime you can incorporate nitrogen fixers, those are going to be great, and there are a lot of really good ornamental options. If you have an area that is just really nutrient deficient, what you can do is plant a nitrogen fixing cover crop, like beans, peas, clover, something that only lives for a season or 2. That way you get all that nitrogen put back into the soil, and then you can plant something there in the following years that can make use of that. Sensory gardens are really neat. There's lots of plants that smell really nice, especially like we have things that like lilacs and peonies that are already in our gardens that smell nice. So when we can make use of those, put them in the common places that you're going to be, in your walking path, right next to your front porch. If they're off in the back corner, you're not going to get off, you're not going to be able to enjoy that aspect of them. Valerian is one that's not as common. This is another great medicinal plant. If you take any natural sleep aids, it probably has valerian root in it. But this gets tall, about 6 feet tall, and then it has really pretty white flowers. You can smell them from about a block away. They're really wonderful. Plants for texture. So I talked about the marshmallow plant with its really soft, fuzzy leaves. Lamb's ear is a ground cover that, this is another one that will get out of control if you don't keep an eye on it. It spreads very readily, but they have those soft, silvery gray leaves that are nice to touch, especially if you have children coming around. Children love to get their hands in things, touch things, smell things, get involved. And then pussy toes is a native that I absolutely love. They are a ground cover. They're a very small plant, but they send up stalks of little flowers that look like the little kitty toe beans, and they're soft to touch. They're really nice. So other uses, things that are going to be a little bit less common, but something that you can think about incorporating, mulch makers. So these are plants that produce a lot of foliage without using up a lot of nutrients. So what we can do then is the chop and drop method, where we just chop off a bunch of those leaves, either drop them in place or drop them in the compost pile, and it's basically like almost free nutrients for other plants to use. So dandelions are actually really great for that, especially in the early spring. They're one of our first emergers, which I know for most people they're weeds. I totally understand that. But if you have a place where you don't mind the dandelions growing, they'll emerge in spring. You can eat the leaves, or you can chop them off and add them to your compost, make a weed tea with them for fertilizing later. There's a lot of great uses for some of these plants that we traditionally think of as weeds. Dynamic accumulators are plants that have deep roots. So the deeper the roots go, the further down that they can get nutrients from. So if you think about plants with really shallow roots, they only have, maybe this much space where they're able to pull nutrients from. But if you have something with a 3-foot-long taproot, it's going to be able to get nutrients from deep in the ground. So what happens as that plant uptakes those nutrients, it gets added into the leaves, flowers, other parts of the plant. And then eventually, when we're ready to cut it down, we can either, like with the dandelion, just cut the leaves off and drop them in place, or cut them down at the end of the season and add them to our compost pile. And that way we can reincorporate those nutrients into our top layer of soil for other plants later on. Windbreaks are also really important. We're in North Dakota. We have lots of problems with this. There's a lot of good shrubs that make good windbreaks. There's a lot of good resources that talk about specific shrubs. But we can also use those ornamental shrubs, those edible shrubs, things that you wouldn't traditionally think of as a windbreak, to fill multiple roles here. Fast-growing vines is a good option because not all of us want to wait for 10 years for our hedgerow to get established. Things like hardy kiwi can grow up to 40 feet once they've gotten established. Chocolate vine is another really fast-growing vine, and if we have something for those to grow up, maybe it's a dead arborvitae hedge because it got winter burned and you don't want to cut it down because it breaks the wind. So adding those vines there can help. And then we have some really fast-growing perennials, or excuse me, some fast-growing annuals or perennials. So sunchokes. The common name here is Jerusalem artichoke, but they're not from Jerusalem, they're not artichokes. So one of the common names is sunchokes or sunroots. They are a native plant. They are in the sunflower family. They get about 6 to 7 feet tall. They grow up really tall over the course of the season, and if you plant them densely, they'll take a beating from the wind, and even if they get knocked over, they'll just start growing right back up. I have some stems left over from last year where you can see where they got knocked over by the wind. They grow up like this, and then like that, and then they go back up. So they're very hardy. That is one that it spreads by tubers. So if you aren't sure if you want them, don't plant them because they will spread. So planting in communities is really important. So all of us here, we live in a community. There's benefits, there's downsides. Things like we have to pay taxes, but in return we get things like schools and the fire department, so there's a trade-off. In plant communities, it's the same thing, where we have benefits of planting things together. So I was talking about those nitrogen fixers, where it's taking that nitrogen out of the air and reducing the stress on the soil. So planting those nitrogen fixers with other things will make those other plants happier. So there's lots of different names for this. Companion planting. Permaculture is one that focuses more on the trees and shrubs and those long-lived plants. So any of these, really, you can do a Google search and find lots of great information about what plants to grow together. And we want to choose good neighbors too. So that plant I was talking about on the previous slide, those sunchokes, Jerusalem artichokes, since they're in the sunflower family, they are one of those plants that will spread that natural herbicide and prevent other things from germinating. So we don't want to plant those next to other seeds that we want to start growing. So things that we already have in the garden. Daylilies are really pretty. For me, they don't bloom a super long time. There are some rebloomers, but there's other uses for them as well. So all parts of the daylily plant is edible. Now, the more ornamental we get, probably those aren't going to taste quite as good because they've been bred for other things. But especially the varieties closer to the natives actually taste pretty good, and you can do a lot of neat things with them edibly. Especially since a lot of them will grow and need to be divided. That's a great way to use them up, because once you run out of friends to give daylilies to, just eat them. And they also have some medicinal uses as well, like sleep disorders and depression. And actually there's the Daylily Club booth downstairs along with the Garden Club booth. I was talking to one of the daylily gals there yesterday, and she was telling me about how she had taken the leaves and made paper out of them. And that's something that I had never considered, but she had experience making paper from other things, and she had tried it as an experiment with daylilies, and it worked out really well. So even if it's just for those fun, weird experiments, there's some neat things that we can do with our plants. Hostas is another one that is edible. Our new shoots, we can add them to a salad, or we can cook them up like stir fry. If you're into making perfume, the essential oils are great for that. And they're great as a slow spreading ground cover. So if you want something to take up a little bit of space but not go too crazy, that's a great one. So peonies, talked about a little bit. We've got our edible flowers. In addition to being really pretty to look at, really pretty to smell, they had various medicinal uses as well. And you can make things like peony sugar. So you can get like sugar to add to your tea, or you can infuse honey with those, and they'll give them that really nice floral scent. Lilacs, we have edible flowers. They smell great. Again, we're medicinal. They work great as a hedge or a windbreak. And you can actually use the flowers and leaves as dyes. Hydrangeas, cut and dried flowers, medicinal purposes. Pollinators, as long as we get the ones that actually have pollens. There are some varieties that don't. So if you're interested in planting hydrangeas for the pollinators, make sure you double check your variety first. Perennial geraniums are a really great one. So this is a geranium with darker colored foliage, which is really interesting. But they're great as a ground cover. They're great for erosion control, and they will repel all sorts of pests because they have a bit of a scent to them. So I know something that a lot of people have trouble with is cats in the garden. Your neighbor's cat comes over and starts digging, doing things you don't want. If you have some geraniums mixed in, that's a great way to discourage them. And speaking of cats, we can use trap crops as well. So if you say, okay, well, I'm okay with a cat being over here on my boulevard, but I don't want them in my garden, we plant geraniums in the garden, and then we plant some catnip over on the boulevard to distract them. All right, so any questions?
I was just going to ask about the perennial geranium. Is that the one that you said that you should cut down after it blooms and then it'll come back, a rebloomer? Or not? Yeah,
that is one that will rebloom. And I know some of the green varieties also have really pretty fall foliage. So that one is one with a lot of good uses. So for me in my garden, they don't bloom for a long time, but if you get those varieties with the interesting foliage and you're looking at using them for other things like the erosion control or the cut and come again, they're a really great plant to have in the garden.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Do you know of any like companion plants for like those squash vine borers, like the squash pests?
So I would start by having some cool season annuals in the area to start off with, things that'll bloom early and get your pollinators and your predatory wasps to come in. So things like alyssum is really good because you can put those in pots and just move them around as needed. I really like cilantro for once the squash plants get blooming because they're smelly, so they'll automatically deter some pests, and then if you let them bolt go to flower, the flowers bring in lots of little pollinators as well that are great at keeping that population under control. Another thing you can do is just making sure you're not growing them for several years in the same place, or spreading them out. Like if you have a little plot of your squash here and then one way over here, that way if somebody gets your squash over here, then maybe these ones will be safe. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much.